Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from a Frontier. I trust you had a great weekend. We spent hours yesterday by the pool at Windsor, which was rather a lot of fun actually. Um, they have a very nice pool. It's heated and all the kids love it, even if it's cold. Yesterday it was very sunny. I'd like to thank Bonnie for having me on his show on CNBC earlier this morning. And he's a very interesting chap to talk with actually. He sort of covers a lot of ground very quickly. Home thoughts. I went back to Herodotus in the histories. Such was the number of the barbarians that when they shot forth their arrows, the sun would be darkened by their multitude. This is Dionysius, not at all frightened at these words, but making light of the Median numbers, answered, "Our Trachinian friend brings us excellent tidings. If the Medes darken the sun, we shall have our fight in the shade." And then this, "It is the greatest and the tallest of trees that the gods bring low with bolts and thunder. For the gods love to thwart whatever is greater than the rest. They do not suffer pride in anyone but themselves." And I like this photograph of the Formula One driver Sebastian Vettel in action during the qualifying session for the Formula One Grand Prix of Abu Dhabi. Quite a visual photograph, I thought. Political reflections. This photograph is of TV cameras outside Palais Coburg, which is where the Iranian nuclear talks are going on, and they're deadlined today. I'll also put up a photograph of the US Secretary of State John Kerry, Iranian Foreign Ministers Javad Zarif and Catherine Ashton in the middle, taken in the last 24 hours. And then an interesting piece by Robert Fisk. Iran is shifting from pariah to possible future policeman of the Gulf. Chatting with my favorite Lebanese banker journalist before a trip to the Gulf last week, I asked him what he thought I should discuss with the investors and asset managers I was to talk in Abu Dhabi. "Iran," he said. "Whatever happens with the nuclear talks, it will again be the most powerful nation in the Muslim Middle East one day. People should plan to invest in the new Iran. If the Americans and the Iranians can reach agreement, and that's a big if, Iran could again be the policeman of the Gulf." Did I really think that Israel and the US Republican Party, pretty much the same thing, says Robert Fisk, when you come to think of it, would let Obama do a nuclear deal with Iran today? But I've long suspected that this is not about nukes or the Hitlerite Revolutionary Guard or Iranian expansionism, especially when the biggest local invader has been a Sunni Muslim called Saddam Hussein, who was at the time, 1980, a chum of the West. No, Iran's crises, our crisis with Iran, if you like, is about that great and historic nation's future geostrategic role in the Middle East and Southeast Asia. In a world of sclerotic Saudi bullying and Israeli right-wing ministers who mimic Iranian ex-President Ahmadinejad in their madness, and American Republicans set on destroying what's left of the Obama legend, there's another creature called ISIS, a vicious Sunni cult or a legion of lost souls, take your pick, which makes Iran look a bit like the Legion of Mary, or to save its Islamic soul, the gentlest of Sufis. Lebanese economist Dr. Nasser Saidi, the former chief economist at the Dubai International Financial Center, says only a Pax Americana Irania can lead to a stabilization of Iraq, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, and prevent Syria from turning into a failed state. Dr. Sadi's thesis is that Iran, with the second largest gas reserves, and this is key, and the fourth largest oil reserves in the world, though I grant we do not know the undiscovered reserves beneath the Sunni central deserts of Iraq, could become a new energy Silk Road. And I concluded by saying, Iran can replace Russia as Europe's energy partner, and it is this that also, I think, signals the potential of Iran's rehabilitation. And a lot of people would think this deal was already agreed. What we're watching now is only choreography. But I take you back to a piece I wrote in October 2013, Barack Obama and Hassan Rouhani, the two Husseins. The recent rapprochement between President Obama and Iran's Hassan Rouhani has certainly snapped a losing sequence in US-Iran relations that goes all the way back to the Iranian Revolution in 1979, when Ayatollah Khomeini overthrew Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, the Shah of Iran. The Shah was the second and last monarch of the House of Pahlavi, otherwise known as the Peacock Throne. Barack Hussein Obama, and Hassan Rouhani share the same name, as did Prophet Muhammad's revered grandsons. Those who pursue the study of anthroponymy, which is the study of personal names, especially in the Islamic world, probably view this as very fortuitous. And I was wandering around the Hirshhorn Gallery in Washington, and I came across this from the Chinese artist Ai Weiwei. What's in a name? A name is the first and final marker of individual rights, one fixed part of the ever-changing human world. Name is the most basic characteristic of our human rights, no matter how poor or how rich. All living people have a name, and it is endowed with good wishes and the expectant blessings of kindness and virtue. Hussein and Hassan are going to have to cut through a great deal of interference. Of course, we're going to see a tremendous amount of it now. In this situation, there are powerful vested interests fully invested in the status quo. If the Pax Americana in the Middle East were a three-legged stool with the US the most important leg, then Israel and Saudi Arabia are the two other legs of that stool. Neither Riyadh nor Tel Aviv are aligned with President Obama's Iranian rapprochement. And Saudi Arabia in particular has become increasingly forthright, and at one point was even threatening its own pivot away from the US. Hannah Alam of the State Department said talks with Iran, the situation on the ground remains fluid. And I said, picking up the signal through the noise of our world in 2014, because it's such a fluid world, is no easy thing. The Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has accused the West of seeking to topple Putin. Putin was quoted in a wide-ranging interview on TASS. We realize the malignity of the Iron Curtain for us. There were periods in the history of other countries, this is Putin, which tried to isolate themselves from the rest of the world and paid very dearly for that, particularly by degradation and collapse. Undoubtedly, we're not taking this path, and nobody is going to build a wall around us. It is impossible. About Obama, so the President of the United States and I know each other. I can't say that we have quite close relationships, but he is a clever person, can evaluate all this. This could be a method of internal political struggle in the US, especially on the eve of the elections to the Senate. Let them sort out these things themselves, he said. Do you remember that photograph I pointed out when you can see him looking over to his shoulder at President Obama? It was quite a powerful message in that photo. Interesting piece in Project Syndicate, Putin on Ice. By blurring its border with Ukraine, Russia is creating a new relationship with an anomalous, internationally unrecognizable entity that belongs culturally and historically not to the imaginary Novorossiya proclaimed by the separatists, but to the undead Soviet Union. The question is why Russian President Vladimir Putin and his entourage view a frozen conflict in Donbass created to preclude a political settlement or lasting peace as a positive outcome for their country. I think they would argue that it was not something that they selected themselves, that it was a battle that was brought to them. Within their current borders, Donetsk and Luhansk are of negligible geostrategic importance to Russia. But, if they lose them, it becomes a signal of a shrinking Russia as well. Moreover, an independent Donbass would impose substantial costs on Russia, which could presumably be forced to rebuild and sustain an economy deprived of all other foreign investment, calling it Cold War. Establishing a frozen conflict in Donbass, Russia has jammed a thorn into Ukraine's side. But, I think, as I said previously, I think, the government in Kiev was toppled extra-constitutionally. The battle was brought to Russia. And, if you look at NATO, it's NATO that has expanded. And I think, from a geopolitical point of view, he has to make a stand. Otherwise, he would be so diminished as to be irrelevant. Interesting piece by Pepe Escobar, Washington plays Russian roulette. Yes, it's Cold War 2.0, the double trouble remix between the US and Russia, between NATO and Russia. The logic behind Cold War 2.0, now in full swing, couldn't give a damn about European stability. The Obama administration launched it with NATO as the spearhead to in fact prevent Eurasian integration, which is the point, and I think that's what the point Putin was making. Building a new Berlin Wall in Kiev, the immediate target is to undermine Russia's economy. In the long run, regime change would be the ultimate bonus. So the logic of escalation is on. The economically devastated EU is a joke. The only thing that counts for the US is NATO. And the overwhelming majority of its members are in the bag, sharing the prevailing mood in Washington and treating Putin as if he were Milosevic, Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi. There are no signs whatsoever Team Obama is willing to de-escalate, important point. And when the Hillarator, president-in-waiting, ascends to the throne, all bets are off. I'll put up a photograph of Vladimir Putin. And then I saw a photograph from very old pics on Twitter of Jackie Kennedy reaching for help after the president is shot in Dallas in 1963, which I think was, it's an anniversary yesterday, I think. And I go back to that piece I wrote on the 6th of October, Current World Affairs Fluid and Uncertain. It was only very recently that I actually studied the assassination of JFK. And what is indisputable is that geolocating Lee Harvey Oswald and then studying the head action of the president confirms that Oswald could not have killed him. It made me think, who or whom can shoot a president stone cold dead and spin a narrative so effectively for half a century? And we had some very unfortunate events over the weekend here with a bus attack, and that took me back to Don Delillo. Mao too. In societies reduced to blur and glut, terror is the only meaningful act. There's too much everything, more things and messages and meanings that we can use in 10,000 lifetimes. Only the terrorists stand outside. The culture hasn't figured out how to assimilate him. It's confusing when they kill the innocent. But this is precisely the language of being noticed, the only language the West understands. The way they determine how we see them, the way they dominate the rush of endless streaming images. Put up a photograph I found on The Guardian of a US demonstrator standing next to a boarded up business as protests continue over the shooting of the 18-year-old Michael Brown. China's central bank obviously made a surprise move on Friday, cutting interest rates for the first time since 2012. Reductions in the deposit and lending rates, asymmetric cut of 40 basis points to the one-year lending rate to 5.6%, 25 basis points in the one-year saving rate to 2.75%. China is now on track to record its weakest annual growth since 1990, and speculation that they could cut again on fears of deflation, and that was clearly to move the markets around. Investors are interpreting the move as a sign that Chinese policy is shifting to offer greater support for the economy with the expectation that potential stabilization in demand and gains in sentiment will be supportive for commodity producers. So interesting, you saw a bounce in the Aussie. Euro, when I looked last, was at 123.92. It touched 123.58 on November the 7th, which was the lowest since August 2012. This was a congestion zone as when the euro went up, and therefore I think it's a congestion zone on the way down, but I'm pretty confident that the euro is going to about 1 next year. Dollar index 88.28. Next leg higher looks as if it's imminent. Japanese yen 117.80. Touched 118.98 on November 20. I think goes through 120. Swissy 0.9707, pound 156.56, Aussie 0.8690, climbed 0.2% today, surged 0.6% on November 21st on the Chinese news. India rupee 61.70, better. China, South Korean won 11.1321, same thing. Rial 251.51, stronger. South African rand back below 11 at 10.94.76. So interesting moves. Euro is the weak story, but commodity currencies getting a marginal lift. I don't know whether it's going to hold. The combination of Japan's monetary and fiscal policy largesse and the ECB's now well-documented plans to expand its balance sheet at a time when the Fed has ended quantitative easing and is moving ever so steadily towards the exit continues to drive the US dollar higher. I agree with that. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. And I think we're on to the second leg of the rally. I'll take you back to comments I've already made 29th of September. I was saying that the dollar has just started getting going. There will be blood in the water. There is a small window if we want to be the sharks. I'll put up a photograph of the shark in the Dubai Mall. 1st September, dollar has embarked on a meaningful broad-based rally as investors anticipate a rate hike in the US ahead of all other developed economies. That was 1st of September. And 25th of August, I said the dollar's been punching higher. If things tip big, the dollar might soar. Euro dollar 123.92. I'm looking for parity in 2015. Big dramatic move on Friday. Got as high as 125.69 and sold all the way down to 123.75. That was draggy. Gold back above 1200. I'll put up a 6-month chart. China rate cut bounced gold. Crude oil $76.82 lifted on that China news, but I expect another big leg lower post OPEC. I take you back to the 13th of October when I was saying, conditions are optimal for a complete washout down as low as $50 a barrel. Put up a 1-year chart as well. Interesting article on Bloomberg about how black pepper now trades at about $9 a kilogram from $2 a decade ago. Consumption has exceeded supply for about 8 years. Very interesting. Coming to Africa, I'm going to put up a graph which shows the cumulative reported cases in Guinea, Liberia, Sierra Leone, provided in WHO's situation report beginning on March 25th through the most recent situation report, November 19. Dr. Frieden of the CDC is saying there's been a substantial change in the trend. There is no longer an exponential increase, good to hear, and in fact there's been a decrease in the rate of infections in Liberia. The Economist tweeted an interesting statistic: Africa's military spending spree. Spending grew 8.3% in 2013 and 65% in the past decade. President Robert Mugabe has changed the constitution of his ruling ZANU-PF party to allow him to directly appoint his deputies, giving the 90-year-old sole power to anoint his successor. Party sources said Sunday. Until now, Mugabe and his 2 ZANU-PF deputies had been elected by members from the country's 10 regions, positioning Grace Mugabe, which, as I've said before, is a scheme that's going to be dead in the water. It might last a fleeting moment, but the moment President Mugabe's gone, that President Grace Mugabe is not tenable. South African all-share, big bounce on Friday, up 3.21%. up 9.94% year to date. Dollar rand improved back below 11 on the China news. Probably a bit of a sell now. Egyptian pound 714.83. Egyptian stock market up 36.744% year to date. Nigeria, the all share is down 17.912% year to date. And I wrote a piece, Nigeria in the Eye of the Storm. Nigerian markets will be on tenterhooks. That's this week ahead of the central bank, which will give its rate decision this week. The Nigerian naira has been in free fall, hitting a new all-time low of 177.65 to the dollar on Thursday. Naira has weakened 11.2% this year. The all-share has slumped 17.912% since the beginning of the year. Nigeria's reserves are down $7 billion or 16% from a year ago at levels of $37.9 billion. The markets are like sharks and they can smell the blood in the water. The central bank is caught in a catch-22 and thrashing around in the water. The sharks are circling. The central bank is damned if they do and damned if they don't increase rates this week. If they do, they're going to have to make it seriously meaningful, and this will be intolerable for the real economy. If they don't, the world and the Nigerians themselves will be selling bucket loads of naira to the central bank. My target for the naira is 200. I can hear the echo of folks asking what went wrong. It was only earlier this year that Nigeria's economy was calculated to have surpassed South Africa's as the largest on the continent, rebased to $488 billion. The big game changer for Nigeria has been the free fall in the price of crude oil. Brent crude is around $80 a barrel, multi-year lows. Lower prices have eroded Nigeria's income, and Nigeria is collateral damage in a red-hot crude oil and geopolitical war, where the US and Saudi Arabia have tipped the oil markets into surplus in order to exert enormous pressure on Russia in particular, amongst others. Nigeria will be hoping that OPEC will cut supply on Thursday in Vienna, and I think that's a Hail Mary pass. I think the OPEC outcome was best described by a guy called Hakan in Bloomberg on November the 14th, where he said if OPEC does nothing, I think we're seeing this market get really trashed another $10 from where it is, and that will translate pretty much straight away into Nigeria. And in the mix swirls a raging insurgency in the north. President Goodluck Jonathan is standing again in February elections. The International Crisis Group said an Islamist insurgency in a polarizing campaign for the presidency, pitting candidates from the mainly Muslim north against an incumbent from the largely Christian south, point to a very perilous contest whose results may also be disputed. The fracas in Parliament is, in my view, the signal of a potentially very dysfunctional situation. The finance minister is saying Nigeria must adjust to permanent oil price shock. Indeed, they must. So let's keep an eye on that. And, I spoke about this severally. There was another attack by Boko Haram. The attackers killed their victims silently without the use of the gun to avoid attracting attention from the multinational troops. On the 10th of November, I said the Nigerian naira and the all-share have been wagadooged. I think they might, and I said earlier last week that they might do a Norman Lamont, i.e. hike interest rates beyond the tolerance of the real economy, and my view is the currency goes to 200. Ghana Stock Exchange is up 6.4801%. This is a 10-week high, and this is all on the positive spillover from the IMF. They just concluded a mission and have put out a press release which is constructive. This is interesting. As soon as a region becomes the birthplace of an African president, this region gets 270% more development assistance from China than it would get if it were not the birth region of the president. This is a St. Gallen report about the geography of China's foreign assistance. Now, here in Kenya, we have this awful attack. The attackers first tried to wave the bus down, but it didn't stop. So the gunmen sprayed it with bullets of the police. When that didn't work, they shot a rocket-propelled grenade at it, apparently. Then someone tweeted me and said, Ali Khan, if they'd shot that, the thing would be blown up and you see it. But I think they must have or threatened to shoot it. One gunman shot from the right, one from the left, each killing the non-Muslims lying in a line on the ground, growing closer and closer to Douglas Ochwadwa, who was in the middle. Then the shooting stopped. Apparently each gunman thought the other shot Ochwadwa. He lay perfectly still until the 20 Islamic extremists left, and he appears to be the only survivor of those who had been selected for death. Al-Shabaab attacked a bus in northern Kenya at dawn on Saturday, singling out and killing 28 passengers who could not recite an Islamic creed. Those who could not say the Shahada were shot at close range. 19 men, 9 women were killed. Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the killings through its radio station in Somalia, saying that it was in retaliation for raids by Kenyan security forces carried out earlier this week on 4 mosques at the Kenyan coast. The attackers first, as we know, tried to wave it down. Gunmen took control of the vehicle, forced it off the road. Some police believe so basically it's in retaliation to what was happening in the coast. 17 of the 28 dead were teachers. And I wrote about this before, several times. In 2014, the last time I spoke about it, I said the dashboard is blinking amber. And I was talking about, comments that Bob Godek, the US ambassador, made. He said the security situation in Kenya, especially in Nairobi and Mombasa, continues to worsen. And indeed, it's got worse. And I was talking in May, if you looked at social media, there was an enormous conversation. When you go through it, it reminded me of this comment by the Marx brothers, who are you going to believe, me or your own eyes? And I think, that duck soup moment was crossed during Westgate, because several things were said which absolutely no one believes, i.e. that they were all dead inside the building. I don't think anyone believes that. And since that point, that credibility gap has got wider and wider. I'll put up an image of the bus and then an image of people on the ground. It's awful. And refer you back to a video by Vice News called Al-Shabaab and the Rise of Jihad in Kenya. And then go back to that comment I made in 2012. And these are Manderas far away from Mombasa, but my concern then and now remains that what appear like uncorrelated spikes and paroxysms of violence conflate, become more broad-based and amplified. Mombasa remains highly problematical. I'll put up a photograph of the sunset. And we now exist in a 24/7 always-on world. And in 2012 I said I was worried Mombasa was morphing into Waziristan, and a tsunami of travel advisories would be winging their way through the air. Nothing has changed. The shilling was softer because of this news, 90.274. Nairobi all share up 18.59% year to date. NSE 20 bounced 0.41% on Friday. It's at 2.5-week highs. Orange is saying they're back to the drawing board, as Viatel, who were looking at buying them out, flopped. The tea companies, Williamson Tea and Captoria Tea, reported half-year results. Williamson earnings per share dropped to 18.42 shillings compared with 41.18 shillings a year ago. Obviously, tea prices have been very soft. Captoria is a similar story. The details are on rich wrap-ups. But the point to note is tea companies, agricultural companies, are worth much more than their share prices, because the net asset value in all these companies, they carry the land at cost price, signals that, there is an enormous arbitrage in these companies. So you can look at tea prices which have been soft, and I commend them for eking out a profit in such circumstances. But that's not really the only story. Once again, thank you for stopping by.